Brought to you by Gino Pinto, John McMullen, national NFL columnist, Eagles Insider, 97.3 ESPN.com, and joins us every day at this time, getting ready for the playoffs. Eagles begin playoff preparation. He writes at 97.3 ESPN.com right now. I know the players, John, had kind of asked for a more arduous practice. Did they get that today?
Yeah, they did. They were inside. I'm a little surprised by that because this is going to be the best day of the week. It's going to snow and then get really cold again. So I thought maybe they'd go outside today, but they were in the bubble. But they had the pads on, and everybody said it was a little more physical, and the players did ask for that. I think especially offensively, I think the mentality was maybe the scaled-back walkthroughs kind of affected the running game, and that being a little bit off over the last couple of games. But we'll see. I still think the weather had more to do with it. Nobody wants to admit that, but it was so obscenely cold. I don't think anybody was going to have success in that type of environment, and it was just bad all around. So I think you got to put that in the rearview mirror and just try to obviously prepare for January 13th.
Nick Foles is obviously the highlighted guy. My question to start the show was, most of these teams, if you mention a team, they have something they highlight. If I say Minnesota, they would say defense. If I say New England, Tom Brady. If I say the Saints, Drew Brees. If I say the Eagles, what is the redeeming quality about them to win a Super Bowl?
Well, he's on crutches, unfortunately. That would be the
that's a low blow.
That would be the Eagles would be the favorite right now if Carson Wentz was healthy and playing. I don't think there's any question about that. I think as you look forward and say, how do you cobble through this and at least get to the Super Bowl? Because I was saying I think that remains a possibility. I really believe that because of home field advantage. Once you get there, if you do get there, I think that's a tall hill to climb against a potentially, whether it's New England or Pittsburgh, because of how good they are offensively. You no longer have home field advantage and everything of that nature. So I think when you look at this team and say, how did they do that? How do they accomplish that?
Yeah.
I think it's got to be the well-rounded nature that made them good in the first place, along with Carson Wentz. And that's that they have a very good defense. It's probably not as good as Minnesota's, but it's very good. They can run the football well at times, as they've done this season, offensively, even with Nick Foles. And they can make plays in the passing game on occasion. Then the special teams with Dave Phipps, which has been very, very solid for years. So I think in all three phases, the Eagles can beat you. And I don't know if there's many other teams that can say that. You talk about, you're right, that everybody has a signature, but they also have a weakness. And the Eagles are pretty good in all three phases, including offense when they run the football.
Yeah, if I was to say to you, okay, on the flip side, everybody has a weakness. What's the Eagles' biggest weakness right now?
Number 9. I mean,
so isn't that a problem?
Well, I think. Look, I don't think it could be as bad as it's been over the last 2 weeks, and I really do believe the weather played into it. I think to play in the type of weather that the Delaware Valley has been in against both Oakland and Dallas, you have to have a Brett Favre or an Aaron Rodgers arm to cut through that kind of air. And as bad as Nick Foles was, and he was bad, you also have to look at the other side. And for the Raiders, Derek Carr was awful, and Dak Prescott was really bad. So it's not like he was the only quarterback that was really, really bad in those two games. I don't know if there's many quarterbacks that would have looked good in that type of weather. The good news, as I mentioned yesterday on the show, is the long-range forecast has the temperature in the 30s. So it becomes a much more manageable situation if that turns out to be the case. So I don't think you're going to get a Nick Foles that plays as poorly as he did against the Raiders and the short stint against the Cowboys.
Nick is a guy, he does have, we just went over the list of the 12 quarterbacks. 5 of them have a pretty good resume. You got Brady, Roethlisberger, Breeze, Newton, and Matt Ryan. The rest of them, only Alex Smith has played in more playoff games than Nick Foles. So, how much do you take from the fact that it is a hodgepodge quarterback playoff field in this top half of the NFC bracket?
Well, I think you do take something of it. I don't know if we know what you're going to get from Jared Goff or what you're going to get from Case Keenum, and we'll see. Look, Goff has had a very good season. He's a number 1 overall pick, so obviously he's got talent. But this is a step up, and the first time you try and do that, it tends to be a bit of a learning curve. As far as Case Keenum, there's been a lot of comparisons because he's a backup quarterback, but look, he's played well. That's the difference between him and Nick Foles, is that he's played well for a consistent period of time. I don't know if it will continue, but you've seen that he can play at a high level. We haven't seen that from Nick Foles yet. So I don't think the question mark is as big. Ultimately, I think the Rams are going to get knocked off by the Falcons. I really do. So I think they're out of the equation, and we'll see how that works out. If that's the situation, Atlanta comes here, and then you have New Orleans or Carolina trying to beat Case Keenum, and who knows what happens in that type of situation. But the NFC is very deep. You're right, the better quarterbacks are at the bottom of the bracket, and that tells you there could be some upsets.
Hey, John, let's look at a couple of quick injury things. Ajayi, what are they stealing from the Sixers? Load management days over there, right?
Well, I stole that from the Sixers.
Yeah, I saw that.
The Eagles haven't used that. The Eagles haven't used that term, but that's what it is. He's not hurt. He's not. It's nothing new.
But let me ask you this on that. Let me ask you this on that. Is this one of the reasons why they have not used him in the way that many people thought they may?
No, I don't think so.
And does it contribute? Does it contribute to why the Dolphins let him go?
Yeah, no question. Definitely, the chronic knee injury is a concern. It's been a concern since the draft when he came out of Boise State. That it's one of the main reasons he was a 5th-round pick, because he's got cartilage issues. It's bone on bone in his one knee. And so a lot of teams were concerned about his longevity, and that's kind of why he tumbled a bit in the draft. From the Dolphins' perspective, they used to give him a day off every week, in practice. They used to give him one day off just for load management. Thank you, Brian Colangelo. But just to get him through the season. They used to do that. When he got here, the Eagles didn't do it. And they didn't go in that direction. And maybe they figured out that they need to do it because that's clearly what they're doing here. They want him ready. There's no concern he won't be ready for the divisional playoff, but it's clear, especially now that the running game becomes more important for 2 different reasons. A, it's outdoors, the weather, January, and B, there's no more Carson Wentz, so you got to rely more on the running game. They need Jay Ajayi to be ready.
Right. So the next guy would be Graham. He didn't play last week. He's not practicing this week. Any thought that he will not be ready 100% next Saturday?
Well, there's no thought that he won't play. There's some thought he won't be at 100%.
I mean, is this your classic high ankle sprain that lingers around for a couple of weeks?
Exactly, and that's the problem. And there's a good chance he won't be 100%. But anybody that knows Brandon knows he's going to play. That's just his nature, and he's doing everything possible to rehab it and get back. But those high ankle sprains, they tend to be 4-week injuries or something of that nature, and that probably indicates, he's not going to be completely 100% healthy, but he's going to play. Make no question about that.
That would be a big one. I mean, he's key if he's not 100%, and if they have to limit that rotation or change that up a little bit. I mean, that would be interesting to see. That'll be an interesting one to monitor. And then Vaitai did not practice, which I know some people would snicker and say, great, but what's the option if Vaitai was less than 100%?
Yeah, I mean, he was out there today, didn't practice, but he was observing. So that indicates to me it's not all that serious. Similar, he and Ajayi were out there. Brandon was not. So Brandon has the more serious of the injuries. So I think he's going to play. If not, it would be Will Beatty. I mean, he's the backup swing tackle now. He's a veteran guy. He's played a lot of games in this league as a left tackle. But obviously he was not signed for the majority of this season, so he's not the player he once was. And the hope is Vaitai will be ready to go. But as you mentioned, the guy the second half of the season has not played well at all, save for the Raiders game. He was pretty good in the Raiders game, and then he started obviously not performing all that well against the Cowboys. And it's basically 4 of the past 5 games he's not played well. And that was the concern when Jason Peters went down. Can this guy handle left tackle? Well, he's certainly not Jason Peters. I mean, I don't think anybody expected that. But when Jason first went down, I thought he was a pleasant surprise. And now it's kind of come back to reality.
Well, and that's the thing, John. I mean, first off, when you entered this year with a full roster, nobody thought 13-3. With a full healthy team, first seed, championship division, that was not thought of. As the dominoes started to fall, it's truly remarkable that they're in this spot, correct?
Yeah, I mean, it is. But we always talk about expectations changing. I don't think anybody saw Carson Wentz taking this huge step in his second season. You hoped for significant improvement, and increased improvement, maybe to 10 or 11 wins, and continuing to trend in the right direction if everything went right. But all of a sudden, he turned into perhaps the MVP of this league. So once you have play like that at the quarterback position, all of a sudden, everything else falls into place. Best example of that is Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay. You saw what happened to the Packers once he went down. You see Ted Thompson forced out. I got news for you, Mike. If Aaron Rodgers doesn't get hurt, the Packers are in the playoffs. Ted Thompson still has his job, and everything's status quo.
Yeah.
That goes back
to the question I asked you about. Every team in this playoff has, I mean, not all of them have legitimate, but the 6 NFC teams, you ask what is their redeeming quality, and they all have an answer. And it's like with most teams. Green Bay, if you asked about why do you think you can win a Super Bowl, it's because we have Aaron Rodgers. Because without him, we stink. It goes to show how important that player is, and it feels like the Eagles' redeeming quality was, well, we have Carson Wentz, and without him, I don't want to say we stink, but we haven't proven to be very good.
Well, yeah, but I think that's what sets the Eagles apart, and that's where the positivity comes from, is the fact that they haven't completely fallen apart. Some would argue they have offensively, but I would argue again, I would go back to some of that, at least, was the weather and just how bad it was over the last 2 weeks. But from the other standpoints, the defense, and you have to use both sides of the coin. Part of it is the weather also, because they get to play against other teams that can't go through it. But nonetheless, it's been lights out after their little hiccup. And you can always count on Dave Phipps' special teams. So this isn't the Green Bay Packers. They didn't completely fall apart. And I think because they have a better roster, 1 through 53. And remember, from the minute Carson went down, I told you on the show, look, if this happens week 3, week 4, yeah, their season is over. But the heavy lifting was already done. The road to the Super Bowl goes through South Philadelphia. The heavy lifting was already done.
Is that their redeeming quality?
All the Eagles have to do,
John, is that their redeeming quality? Is we have home field advantage?
It is. And all they have to do is win 2 games where they usually win. And I think you can throw – remember, this team was undefeated at home before the Cowboys game, and you can throw that game out the window.
And I'm willing to do that.
The starters barely played. Well, the starters barely played.
Yeah. No, I don't. I put no stock in that game.
Yeah, exactly. I put no stock in that as well.
Some Bitcoin, maybe.
So, well, that's a good stock,
right?
But it's they had won 9 straight before that meaningless loss. I think they were 13-2 under Doug Peterson at home. That's pretty good. You can hang your hat on that and say this is a place where it's really difficult for people to come in and play. And so I think you can hang your hat on that.
Giants will interview Eagles defensive coordinator Jim Schwartz for their head coaching job this weekend. The interview will take place in Philly, this per Adam Schefter. He's the first candidate to meet with the Giants and is considered one of the favorites, right? I mean, the other day, Schwartz was linked to the Cardinals.
Schefter's pushing it.
Well, right.
I don't know.
I was going to say how because the New York people, I was reading New York stuff last night, and they're seeming to think that Schwartz is not a candidate.
Yeah, I think the disconnect is Ernie Accorsi, who's the old Giants GM, very successful, is sort of giving them advice, and he's a big Jim Schwartz guy, and I think it's coming from that. If they listened to Ernie Accorsi, they probably would hire him, but Dave Gettleman has his own ideas, and from the people in New York, it seems like they're going to go in a different direction. But then there's the part of it that there's no hurry for any of the Eagles assistants because they're on a bye week. They have to play next week. You can't hire them anyway. So you can afford to wait. There's no real expediency to get it done. Mm-hmm. And if you think they're going to win the divisional round, all of a sudden you're in the championship game, and who knows how long it could go.
Can you interview? If you make the Super Bowl, I don't recall, but if you make the Super Bowl, can you interview during that down week?
Yes, okay. You can interview again during that bye week.
That's new, right? That's like recent.
It's not that recent. It's been that way for a number of years. Everything shut down until that bye week. You can't obviously interview during the weeks leading up to the divisional round and then the championship game itself. And then you have the down week where you can interview them again. But remember, in years past, teams that make runs to the Super Bowl, generally their assistants kind of get screwed over a little bit because teams get very impatient.
Yeah.
Once the hiring starts.
But the Eagles should teach teams to be patient.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. Generally, if you're going to the Super Bowl, for instance, Minnesota has Pat Shurmur, who was the interim coach here when Chip got fired, obviously coordinator. He's being interviewed by 4 different teams last time I checked, basically everybody. So he's a very, very hot candidate. And if they make a run towards the Super Bowl, are people going to wait for him? Well, you probably should. But it's shown in years past, teams get very impatient. And all of a sudden, when the questions start rolling up, and the local media in the different cities says, hey, this guy got hired, why aren't you moving? And by the way, more than the actual head coaches, the thing that sort of runs this train is the assistant coaching market, because that starts to dry up. And as coaches get hired, they pick the best assistants, and that becomes an issue. So a lot of times when you make a Super Bowl run, it hurts those hot assistants on those Super Bowl teams.
By the way, Bengals coach Marvin Lewis confirmed that the Raiders will interview Paul Guenther for their defensive coordinator vacancy. I guess there's further dots connected to Gruden?
Yeah, that was the whole thought originally, was Gruden and Guenther would come in together for the Raiders. I think that's going to be the case. But John Gruden, you never know. I mean, he could wake up one day and say, you know what, I don't want to do this. And that would be the only thing that derails it. But it looks pretty
How is the whole thing
that,
with him potentially getting ownership stake? Wouldn't that have to get approved by the other teams?
No, you only – the only really bylaw from ownership from the league perspective is that the main owner has to own at least 30% of the team.
Okay. So you could bring anybody in a smaller percentage and not have to get voted on.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I was wondering about that the other day when I read that why would other teams approve him to be part of the ownership?
No, yeah, you don't have to approve a minority owner. It would probably be less than 5% of the team. And one of the reasons probably the Raiders have put that in play is because over the years, Mark Davis has been one of the cheaper owners in the league to begin with. Yeah. And now he's got to pay Jack Del Rio. He had a number of years left on his contract on top of what he's got to pay Gruden. And remember, they're going to have all kinds of debt service for that new stadium in Las Vegas. And as I said, to be an NFL owner, I mean, there are levels. Obviously, you got to be a very rich guy. But in the club of NFL owners, Mark Davis is not a rich guy in that category.
By the way, John Gruden said this morning on the Golick and Wingo show that there's a good chance he'll coach the Raiders. So this is one of the first times that he has leaned.
There's a good chance.
Yeah. He said they're still, I believe, going through the interview process.
And they also have to.
How are they? Okay, give me your creative. Give me your creative way that they get around the. Give me your creative way they get around the Rooney Rule.
Well, they're not. I mean, they'll probably interview somebody in the organization, and that's usually how people do it. And just a cursory interview, which probably amounts to, "Hey, could you come in and talk to us? Would you like to be the head coach of the Raiders?" Yes, I would. And then say, "Well, we think very highly of you, but we're going with John Gruden." That's basically how it's going to happen.
Yeah.
But the Raiders.
He, by the way, disputed the validity of the ownership.
Yeah, that's not by any means confirmed.
Yeah.
People were speculating that that's maybe one of the ways Mark Davis could afford it, because as I said, he's not the most cash-heavy owner in this league.
Are you surprised that he was willing, or that ESPN put him in that interview?
What do you mean for the interview
this morning? I mean, he's on. I guess he was on Golick and Wingo, right?
Oh no! I mean, they love that. ESPN.
Well, I'm sure ESPN loves that, but does he? I mean, it puts him in a tough spot.
Well, I think the bigger issue for teams around this league is that Gruden's going to finish out doing his duties, and that would mean. I think he's got the Kansas City game.
Yes, he's got Kansas City.
And if you think about the Kansas City being in the AFC West, I don't know if Andy Reid is going to be all that happy about letting John Gruden, because generally the TV people get tremendous access to practices and talking to the coaching staff and things of that nature to get ready for the broadcast. I don't think the Chiefs are going to be very happy about that.
John McMullen at JF McMullen. Follow him on Twitter for all the Eagles news the next couple of weeks. And, of course, anything in the NFL that happens, you'll hear it right here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. Thanks, pal.
Hey, thanks, Mike.